Do you spend hours in your head thinking about something that happened, could have happened, or might happen? Do you ask others what to do so you don't make a mistake? Welcome to the Playing It Safe podcast. I am Dr. Z, your host. I am a clinical psychologist, an author, and a person that is super passionate about sharing with you science-based skills to overcome any type of fear-based struggles. Who doesn't experience fear? Who doesn't play it safe? In this show, we will discuss how fear-based reactions happen in day-to-day life, how playing it safe behaviors look like, sound like, and feel like, how you can put into action solid tips from behavioral science to get unstuck from worries, fears, obsessions, and anxieties, and how you can start doing what works, what matters, and what you care about. Behavioral science doesn't have to be boring. Thanks for listening, and let's get started. Do you ever wonder how a creative person makes ideas happen? How a person creates a concept and puts it into action in a campaign, art project, or book? How do ideas scale to the point that they are so popular and well established? Do you ever wonder how a creative mind chooses an idea and discount hundreds of them when pursuing a creative project? I had a chance to chat with Aaron Harvey, the co-founder of Made of Millions, a non-profit organization that is at the vanguard of creating social media campaigns in mental health. Made of Millions has been rebranding mental health, developing impactful messages for the lay audience, and also creating awareness about mental health in different levels, including work environments. I very much enjoyed learning from Aaron directly about his creative process behind the scenes, how he conceives an idea, how he handles creative stuckness, how he manages his fears of ideas not landing well, how he scales ideas, and how he knows when to step back from an idea. This was a casual and sweet conversation. Hope you enjoy this interview, and I would love to hear any reactions you have. You can always send me an email. My personal website is www.thisisdrz.com. Again, the website is www.thisisdrz.com. I wish you a lovely week and see you next week. Bye-bye. Aaron, thank you so much for chatting with me in the Playing It Safe podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I would love to hear a little bit about how you handle fear and moments in which you got stuck as an artist, as a creator, as a person that works in the advertising industry.
Yeah, totally. I'm stuck all the time, I guess. You know, my day job is running a creative agency in the advertising space called Ready, Set, Rocket. And so we work with a lot of different clients in different industries, sports and fashion and entertainment. And so every challenge is unique and different, and every assignment takes a different idea and approach and a way to bring it to life. So, you know, that plus working on advocacy work, plus just being all OCD in my head a lot of times, I tend to just get stuck all the time. So,
Yeah,
is what it is.
Do you mind sharing, how did you go into advertising? What's the story behind that? Because you're very well known for your advocacy work, but I'm so curious about this creative side of yours.
Yeah, so I used to play music, and you know, there's a big music scene of people who are touring and making records and doing all that stuff back in like the early 2000s, and a lot of us at that time were getting into making websites and designing posters and doing photo shoots and doing licensing deals for music and this and that and whatever. And so like all the core tenets of the idea of creating an identity, of creating a style or a sound, of translating that through social media, and then building audiences and booking tours and doing deals and negotiations. I mean, every aspect of that was just a total shoe-in to what advertising really is, you know, the creative world is. And I think even too, when you look at how, when you're mixing music and there's all these different components that come together and people walk away with a feeling, you know, whether that's beat or the bass line or the lyrics or the vocals. Like those are all distinct individual elements, but when they come together, you just get a feeling out of it. And I think advertising is the exact same way. There's a lot of different pieces and components involved.
Mm-hmm.
So when they come together, you know, hopefully a consumer relates to it and connects to it.
Mm-hmm. But how did you go into advertising?
I was like in between tours. I was wrapping burritos at Chipotle. Yeah, my buddy was like, "Hey, do you want to come work in this startup like branding agency?" And I was like, "Not really," because I didn't really want to like take up my cognitive space doing something like that. I wanted to just like wrap my burritos and go home and work on music and stuff. And then in the end I did it, and that's how I kind of just fell into it and fell in love with it. And then we started to build that business out together.
Mm-hmm.
And then I moved to New York and started my own shop.
Got it. When you say I fell in love with that, how was the process to start creating something visually and coming up with the stories?
I mean, I feel like I'm an entrepreneur at heart. Like I need new and fresh challenges, and I'm willing to take a tremendous amount of risk. And so I think this world of figuring out as you go in an industry that was figuring itself out. For example, when I got in, we focused a lot on digital work, and there were no definitions for work processes. There was no definition for what was a best-in-class product or which software language or this or that or whatever. So like all the web was really defining itself as a medium for communication. And so that just really tied itself into more of my entrepreneurial sort of spirit, which was like, oh, we can figure out the industry together. We can build a business together. We can keep going, cha-cha-cha, like that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. When you started Ready, Set, Rocket, how did you go from that initial conversation you had with one of your friends to what it is right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think like always doing first and then asking second was a really big component of it. I think in my previous work engagement, I saw some of the opposite, right? Like a lot of people would approach and want things. So like we didn't have to just do them because there were a lot of people asking. But I knew when we were starting our own company that like I was just gonna have to go out, overcome my anxiety of networking, my social anxiety of like putting myself out there, asking for money, all these things that I really honestly wasn't comfortable doing and didn't want to do. But to achieve my goals, I needed to do them. So I sort of just forced those exposures and then just lean into that and always did a favor first for everyone. And that always came back around in the end and helped me build the network I needed to build to, you know, create an agency that's been around now for 10 years. Things.
Mm-hmm. In the process of building your own thing and creating, there is so much iteration, there is so much piloting projects, piloting ideas. I'm super curious about your creative process. Among the hundreds of ideas that may pop up in your mind, how do you know which ones you want to pursue?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, you know, when we started and when I started in this career, it was a career of change. And I remember the first couple of years being involved in it. And it was like, well, we're really relevant right now, but like in 2 years, what we're doing today, we probably won't be doing. So there was a fear of like losing relevance. And then I was like, you know, once I settled into that a little bit, I was like, well, our entire DNA is based on change. Like the industry changes, technology changes, social changes, consumer behavior changes, all that stuff is changing all the time. So as long as we are present and we can be sort of like a guidepost for our clients and for, you know, our teammates, then we can, you know, continue to iterate. So, you know, I'd say that that's just so foundational to it.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it comes to like the process of creating ideas, you need to make the box as small as possible so that you can step out of it. Yeah, we had a former creative director on my team who learned that from his creative director. And it's like, you want to have pie in the sky ideas, but I think in order to get there, you really got to try to narrow in the strategic lens in which you're looking at a problem to be as tight as possible. And then to say, how do we solve that in a way that's unique and interesting? And so that kind of can create a positioning for a way you're going to go about solving something. And then when you look at all the ideas you have, you're like, which of these ideas best pays off that market need or that position we've created? Which of these ideas is in best service of that? And then which ones are actually feasible based on resourcing, timing, budgets, all those other types of things.
So many moving pieces. If I can ask a little bit more about the nitty-gritty process, do you mind sharing an example when you had an idea that was big, but you have to scale it down a little bit?
Yeah, no, I feel that all the advocacy work really fits in that bucket because, I didn't know that I had OCD or anything until was it 6 years ago. I was 33 and I'd experienced this for a really long time. And when I learned that that's what I was going through my whole life, then I immediately wanted to do work, but it felt big and I didn't know what kind of work. I needed to work on myself first. So I spent about 2 years working on myself, but also I was open to trying anything, any prescription drug I could be prescribed, any behavioral therapy or whatever, because I wanted to be able to wrap my head around like, what is this whole world that is so foreign to me and to so many people? And all that time I was getting frustrated with myself because I wanted to be able to create some advocacy work. But I think there's a moment that comes when and there's a little bit of clarity. And if you feel like you're trying to force it, it might just not be time yet. It's easy to be hard on ourselves where we feel like in that moment, for me, I need to bring this information to the world and help other people, but I didn't have my point of view yet. I didn't have my lens for it. And then I finally hit that moment where I was like, 2 years later, I was like, okay, we're going to launch intrusivethoughts.org and we're going to tell a story about intrusive thoughts instead of about OCD, because everybody already thinks they understand OCD. They generally understand it incorrectly. And now I can talk about this symptom and do that on repeat in a million different magazines in a million different ways because it's something we can all relate to, having weird, unwanted thoughts, right? So I needed that little from I want to help the world better understand OCD to, okay, here's the opportunity. I need to go and talk about intrusive thoughts, make this a conversation, build a web presence around it, tap into a lot of search traffic that people are looking for online. And that was really kind of an example of maybe something that felt overwhelming, but trying to pare it down.
Got it. Going back to that process, you were very clear. You want to spread the word about OCD, but then you waited for clarity about the concept, the idea. So how does it happen when you're working with the stories? How do you go from having an idea to making it happen?
I mean, the truth is with the charity, it's a lot easier to bring ideas to market. I mean, we can come up, for example, we did a campaign in May called No One Told Me, and the idea was to bring awareness to the 10 or more years it takes for people to seek care, and what do you wish that you knew when you were 13, 14 years old? And that was the premise. And that was just an idea that I had over a weekend, a couple of weeks before May. And within 2 weeks, we were able to build a motion graphics package and tap the community and build assets and, roll a whole campaign out. Because again, it's just us sort of curating and making decisions and checking with scientific advisors like yourself. With the agency, it's very different because it's business and there's clients and there's layers depending on the size of the company. So, normally in my world, a client is going to have some strategic goals that largely tie to either revenue or brand perception or things of that nature, social impact now. And so then you're kind of working down from there. How can you have this bigger goal, which is to, build awareness in a market for this and sell more of this product to generate this amount of revenue, right? So there's a really simple phrase I also learned from one of our creative directors where it's a really easy way to think about a brief, which is get to buy. So I want to get this audience, whoever that is, to do this thing by these means. And so if you were to put that in any other context, Made of Millions, it'd be I want to get 13 to 18-year-old kids to understand the psychology of various conditions and symptomology by, developing madeofmillions.com as a robust resource that brings together art and science and culture in a way that better explains this information. Just an example, but like that kind of framework can help you sort of wrap your head around how to do that. And then it's just a long process of iterating and bringing those things to life over time with your clients and with a lot of times with the consumer included in the process.
It sounds like it's a very dynamic process, right? Now, when you're iterating and you have many ideas, fears may pop up. Fear about people not responding well, fear about not saying the right message, not using the right words. How do you handle that?
I think it just requires repetitive rejection. I mean, really, there's just no way around it. Like, I'm a super anxious person, not as much these days, but like back in the day, I mean, to even for a client to ask me a question when I first started about like what's an idea for this or what would you do for that and put me on the spot, I actually would have so much anxiety that it would shut down my ability to sort of think and could make me feel like, oh, I didn't have the idea on the spot. Now they're not going to hire me, or they don't think we're that creative or whatever. And it took me years to sort of learn when I have to respond and when I don't. And I think a really powerful thing that most people, I think, when they're coming up in their career don't understand is you don't have to answer every question. And, a lot of times you can sort of say like, that's a great challenge, right? Like, let me go back and think about that. It's leading me to think around X, Y, and Z, but let me go back and come up with some ideas, and they'll be like, great. And so a lot of times you put this pressure on yourself to answer a question in real time that you don't really need to answer. And in fact, answering it might not even be in the interest of the person asking. It might be better if you wait.
Got it. So I think distinguishing when you want to share something, when you have to step back a little bit.
Yeah, feeling empowered to not answer something on the spot, feeling empowered to not have all the answers all the time. That's super important. Most people get really nervous about being asked questions that they're like, oh, should I know the answer to this,
Well, there is also, I think, so much pressure about saying the right thing.
Yeah.
And somehow we're holding into the idea that in this conversation, my whole career is invested. That's a heavy weight to carry in our mind.
Right.
Let me ask a little bit more. Among the different campaigns you have come up with, like Dear Manager, No One Told Me, Intrusive Thoughts, you have limited space, limited attention. I don't know, honestly, how much time people look at the screen before they swipe, before they move on. So I think the chances to reach an audience may be different than if I'm giving a workshop. How do you handle that process when you have such a limited amount of time and a space to come up with a story, to come up with a message?
Yeah, I mean, I think once you have your general idea, then you've got to look at different design executions and writing executions to see like what's going to stick. And a lot of times people need something that is simplistic, that, some type of device they can hang on to. Like no one told me is a device, because you're like, oh, well, there's plenty of things no one told me. Everyone can relate to that idea. And then once you see how it's executed with a portrait and it's vulnerable, and there's lines there that are explaining something related to mental health, and you've experienced similar anxiety, like that can help you sort of stop, and then it can help you sort of empathize with the image and the visual, and then consider whether or not you might actually want to participate or follow or share your own No One Told Me. And I think things like Dear Manager are similar, right? So like a fill in the blank in a way, where it's like, Dear Manager, like, okay, we need to have a conversation. I can wrap my head around that. Workplace mental health matters now, and we should start talking about it. So I think you need to take a big idea, which is like, oh, we want to use the workplace as a way to solve the mental health problem by educating all the employees around the world. You've got to be able to put some tangible little simple hook, and there's a little hook or a little wrapper on it.
I know for me, there is a different process when I'm writing versus when I'm editing, right? When I'm writing, I want to put as much as I can, just output. But of course, my mind comes with all types of fears. No one is going to read this book. People will think you're a failure. People will think you don't know what you're talking about. And the task is to hold these fears and keep writing. How do you handle those fears? And what are the fears that you may encounter when you're creating a story and a message or the visuals that come with it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the process of creation should be the fun part. It can also be laborious if you don't feel like you're getting there. It can be extremely frustrating. I'm pretty hard on the sleeve, and the people I work with, if the ideas aren't getting there, it can be. I have to check my negativity to the best possible at the door, not at the individuals, but just the frustration. I want to get to the right work. So I think like just at all costs, trying to get to the right work where you know that if you pitch this and you lose, you still believe in what you pitched. It might not have been right for the company. Maybe it was a shit idea, but in the end, you believe that idea could solve the business problem that they were up against. And that's kind of what you have to get to. And that's what you have to put your stock in, because this whole world is very subjective. I mean, the whole world of creative and advertising, and whether you like this color or that color. So 99% of our job is to objectify subjective information. So you can't point to this objective with this performance indicator and this revenue goal and this audience segment that likes this thing this way, and then you can't show how your creative will back into that. You almost have to take the client out of the equation with them, and you have to take yourself out, so that we both are looking at it from the perspective of, is this target audience going to respond effectively or desirably to this information? Not is me personally or you, or are you going to take it home and show your husband or your wife or whatever? Like, all that stuff is completely pointless, because it's just, that's not who the target audience is 90% of the time, right? So detaching the personal opinion, both as a creator, but also as a client, is critical to getting to the best work for a business objective.
But that's really hard, right? I think many times when we're creating something, whether it's a painting or a book, we get attached, like it's my little thing. How did you learn to detach yourself from that in a way that there is a space for development of the idea versus holding to it with white knuckles?
Well, yeah, and that's a really tough thing. I mean, when I started this, I started as a business owner. So I was very amiable to clients saying, I don't like that, or more like this, or less like that. I didn't have a lot of personal stock in the ideas, because my goal was to grow my company. My goal wasn't to sell this idea to you. My goal is to grow this company. In order to grow it, I need to give you a great idea. You need to be happy with it. So if you weren't happy with it, then I move on. Over the years, my role has lessened tremendously, because I'm not doing every aspect of the company. We've got a staff. So now if I work on something and it is my idea, and it is something like last week, I pitched something major and totally got, eliminated from an RFP process in round one, right? I mean, that's like, I get rejected so often, you know what I mean? Because we're constantly pitching. It's not just like pitching to win the account, then there's pitching on an ideas on an assignment, and there's other assignments. So it's constant rejection and iteration. So when I hear a lot of people talk about being nervous about being rejected or applying for a job and not getting that job, I also see creatives on our team and otherwise get really personally hurt by work not moving forward, or one design being chosen over another. I can totally understand where they're coming from, and I think that's a natural place to be. And it's an important place to be, because if you detach too much, then like, what's the point? You're not invested emotionally in your work. So it's important, but it's just repetition of failure and just keeping and going.
Yeah. No, I can see that for you has been having to pitch and hearing no many times that help you to step back.
Yeah.
One of the things that I hear in the creative community is how difficult it is to get feedback, no matter how the feedback may be delivery. If people say something about what you're writing or a visual that you come up with, it feels like you did something wrong, something awful. Did you ever experience that, in which feedback or any form of rejection felt very personal. And how did you handle that?
Yeah, I mean, no matter what, and increasingly now it feels more personal to me because my role is more just like pitching, ideas and things like that. And I also am much more confident in what works and what is successful and what doesn't. And sometimes, of course, I think that I'm being told by someone that something isn't the right solution when I believe 100% that it is. And maybe I'm wrong, but that's my belief in that moment. And so I think it's hard in the beginning to look at rejection because you maybe don't know how to handle it yet. It's hard 10 years now into owning my agency in some cases to look at rejection because there's ego that can come with it, which is like, I've done this X amount of times. This is a great idea or a great design concept or a great whatever. And you're not seeing it. And so, you're constantly having to check your self-doubt at the door, but also, check your ego at the door. That goes for the young guns too, that, people, they're hot shit designers or whatever. And they have to deal with work getting rejected and not moving forward, or a piece that doesn't look as good moving forward, or something being taken in-house, or two beautiful concepts that are so distinct being mashed up into one and it losing its creative energy. And yeah, so it's just part of the job, but it's probably checking fear and ego at the door and just trying to humbly represent your work and honor it for what it is and defend it, but defend it only to the point that the defense is productive, because the answer is no and you keep defending it, it's just awkward for everyone. It's a waste of everyone's time.
Have you experienced that when maybe you were stuck defending an idea that people weren't receptive, but it meant a lot to you?
Yeah, I mean, I feel that way all the time with the nonprofit, because with the nonprofit I have very limited resources and I have 1,000 ideas. So it's all about which ideas do we lean into when, not just mine, the teams, like what of all these ideas are we leaning into when? And a lot of times it can be challenging because, for example, even with the Dear Manager campaign and the workplace and all that stuff, I strategically knew that if we could build credibility in the workspace as a culturally relevant resource that could help transform how people show up to work and what their understanding of mental health is, even though that wasn't the super cool culture play, and we were doing a lot with like art exhibitions and all kinds of stuff. But if I had to lay my chips on one bet, it was lean into the workplace, because that's going to create the relationships that we need, both with advocates in companies that are cool, like media companies and television entertainment, but also like with a real source of credibility and revenue, right? So I had to, in some way, just even disappoint some people that we work with, because we could be doing cooler cultural things, but those don't have real metrics attached to them. They don't represent the financial opportunity and the growth opportunity. So I had to edit, and be like, 6 months, all we're doing is Beautiful Brains, Dear Manager, World Mental Health Day, workplace. And, that paid off. Now we're at a completely different level of credibility. Then we're now seeking monetization of things in the workplace, which will then fund our more, fun, culturally interesting, immersive type of experiences.
I can see how you have to prioritize and be strategic about it. Now, in that process, how you manage the different ideas that a team may have. We all have opinions and we want this, and we sometimes believe strongly this is the way to go. How do you handle this fear about people feeling that you're not taking them seriously or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly over the years, and I didn't start as a business person or a manager. I had no experience, right? So I've made a lot of mistakes over the years with critiquing work, or one designer feeling more important than the other designer, whatever that is, certainly. But in the end, the more that you can objectify your feedback, the more valuable it is for everyone, because you're working with smart individuals who are passionate and driven, and sure, there's some ego and sure there's some disappointment, but that's where, again, you've got to anchor back to like, what's the objective? Who's the audience? What's the brand all about? And how do we translate that into an experience that is going to, you know, be the most engaging and exciting or memorable or deliver the most revenue? So if that's the formula, when you're giving feedback on something subjective, even internally, you can't complain about a client giving you subjective feedback when if you're doing the same thing internally. So internally, you have to be able to say objectively A, B, and C. The typography is stronger in this one. It's more progressive, which is more on brand in these ways. Or, you know, this message is, and sometimes you won't know the answer, right? And so you might want to actually bring consumers or test audiences in and be like, let's give both comps a fair shot. Or sometimes I won't like one of something or another, but we'll throw it in the mix and see what happens, you know? So it's just a process. But again, like being as objective as possible is in the interest of everyone, because you can't really argue with that. And you can also learn from it.
I get what you're saying, that as you say at the beginning, objectifying something is very subjective, right? You have to be able to make objective and subjective. Here's my last question, and I'm super grateful we have a chance to chat. If you were to have a cup of coffee with any person you want, who will that be? And why? It's all about coffee time.
Well, yes, coffee is like my number one pastime, so it should be really easy for me. Coffee with anyone in the world. She's alive or dead?
Anyone.
Oh my God, I'm so bad at these kinds of things. Maybe Kurt Cobain.
Okay, walk me through that, because
same reason, creative process, you know, just getting in his head a little bit.
Got it. It was such a pleasure to chat with you and to really learn more the behind the scenes of all the super cool things you're doing.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening. If you like this episode, I will very much appreciate it if you will subscribe and share this podcast with your friends. And if you're feeling extra generous, I welcome a review on Apple Podcasts. Show notes of this episode are in the website playingitsafe.zone. Make sure to subscribe to my newsletter so you can receive more tips to stop all types of unworkable playing it safe actions. See you soon!